Welcome to Concert 101, a video introduction to the next concert by the Tasmanian Symphony Orchestra. The soloist in this concert is German horn virtuoso Stefan Dohr, who is one of the principal horn players of the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra. He'll be appearing in the first half of the concert. In the second half, we have the Symphony No. 9 by Franz Schubert, which has the nickname Great. So, for those reasons, the concert's called Stefan the Great. Conducting the concert is Eivind Aadland, Chief Conductor and Artistic Director of the Tasmanian Symphony Orchestra, who's going to join me a little bit later to chat about Schubert's Ninth Symphony. In the meantime, let's address the two works in the first half of the concert, the Horn Concerto No. 3 by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart and the Horn Concerto No. 1 by Richard Strauss. These two works were written a little over 100 years apart, the Mozart Concerto in 1787 and the Strauss Concerto in 1882-83. And during that time, during those 100 years, the horn changed substantially. The Mozart Concerto was written for what's called a natural horn, that is, an instrument that was really just a coiled metal tube with a mouthpiece at one end and a bell at the other. Its origins go back to the hunting horn, and to this day, the orchestral horn retains an association with the outdoors. So often in orchestral music, when we hear the horn, it signals the bucolic, the pastoral, or indeed the hunt. Importantly, the instrument that Mozart wrote for, and he composed 3 complete horn concertos, contained no valves. Because of this, the natural horn had a limited number of notes available to it, only about 16 or so, derived from the natural harmonic series. During Mozart's time, it was found that further pitches could be obtained through hand stopping, that is, by inserting the right hand into the bell of the instrument. Even so, the full range of notes available to the natural horn was not extensive, and it was a perilous instrument to play, as the different notes were achieved through minute variations in lip tension and wind pressure. Things got easier for horn players in the early 19th century with the invention of valves. The valves, which are opened and closed by levers, alter the length of the tube, making a full chromatic range available. In other words, if you were to think of it in terms of a piano keyboard, over a 4-octave range, the natural horn was only able to pick out notes here and there, whereas the modern valve horn is able to play the entire range of notes, black and white, on a piano keyboard over the same range. But lip tension and wind pressure are still crucial, and the valve horn remains a very challenging instrument to play. The late, great Australian horn virtuoso Barry Tuckwell, who was a frequent guest conductor of the Tasmanian Symphony Orchestra in the 1980s, likened playing the horn to driving a fast car on an oily road. Just to be clear, our soloist, Stefan Dohr, will be playing both concertos on a modern valve horn. Horn concertos tend to be not very long on account of the demands that I've just outlined. So it's a rare thing to hear 2 of them back to back. It's a sign of the expertise of our soloist. The Mozart and the Strauss concertos each last for about 15 minutes or so and are in 3 movements, basically fast, slow, fast. Mozart wrote his concerto for a horn virtuoso of his day, a chap called Ignaz Leutgeb, who, when he wasn't playing the horn, ran a cheese shop in Vienna. Richard Strauss grew up with the sound of the horn ringing in his ears. Strauss's father, Franz, was one of the great horn players of the second half of the 19th century, and he played the solo parts in many of Wagner's operas when they were new. That said, he loathed Wagner and his music and encouraged in his son a love for Mozart above all. And we can hear this in Strauss's Horn Concerto No. 1. It's not a Mozart pastiche by any means, but its cleanness and clarity owe more to music of the classical period than the Romantic. You'll notice too that Strauss composes for what's basically a classical-sized orchestra, modest wind forces and no low brass. One last thing, Strauss was all of 18 years old when he wrote the concerto. It's the earliest work by Strauss that holds a place in the orchestral repertoire. After interval, we have Schubert's Ninth Symphony, which, as fate would have it, opens with a theme enunciated by two horns in unison. Listen out for it, as it's one of the main themes of the first movement. The Ninth, which was composed in 1826, was Schubert's last completed symphony. Schubert composed 7 symphonies all up, not 9. He sent the manuscript to Vienna's main concert society, the Gesellschaft der Musikfreunde, hoping for a performance. But after a playthrough, the musicians decided the Ninth was too long and too difficult, both for them and for audiences, and it was shelved. In fact, shelved isn't the right word. It was forgotten. That is, until it was discovered among Schubert's papers after his death. It passed into the hands of Robert Schumann, who, excited by what he saw, handed it to Felix Mendelssohn, who was both a composer and a conductor. In fact, he was conductor of the Gewandhaus Orchestra in Leipzig in Germany, and it was there that Schubert's Ninth was first performed in 1839, more than 10 years after the composer's death. The nickname, Great, was applied to the symphony, we don't know by whom, to distinguish it from Schubert's Sixth Symphony, which, like the Ninth, shares the key of C major. But Great also signals the sheer scale of this symphony. It's long, nearly an hour all up. The first 2 movements alone last for more than 30 minutes. The second movement, which isn't really a slow movement at all, it's marked andante con moto, slowly but with momentum, opens with an oboe melody, which you're going to hear a lot of as the movement progresses. The third movement has a powerful rhythmic drive. It's a scherzo, not a minuet. And the finale scampers along at a furious pace. In fact, there's a relentlessness to the violin writing in the final movement. There are circular patterns that just go round and round, such that when Mendelssohn tried to introduce Schubert's Ninth to the Philharmonic Society in London, the violinists found the writing nonsensical and the piece had to be withdrawn. Bearing all of these things in mind, let's now delve a little deeper into this symphony with conductor Eivind Aadland. Eivind, thank you so much for coming on to chat about Schubert's Ninth Symphony. I mean, Schubert, of course, was an intensely musical person. The sheer quantity of music that he wrote over the course of what was a very short life, I mean, it's staggering, the amount of music that he wrote. Robert Winter, writing in the New Grove Dictionary of Music and Musicians, says that, and I quote here, of all the genres in which Schubert worked, the one that interested his friends and supporters least was orchestral music. So my question to you is, how successful in your view was Schubert as a symphonist, using the Ninth as an example?
When we talk about Schubert's symphonies, we have to remember that the 6 first were written before he was 20.
Yeah.
They're very early works. I love some of the early Schuberts, like the 5th. It's a perfect little symphony. But it points back towards Mozart. Yeah. It's in this really classical style, whereas the 2 last point far forwards. And I think the great C major especially points towards Bruckner. Bruckner would not be Bruckner without Schubert's C major symphony. And we also have to remember that most of the works Schubert wrote were not intended for the big concert hall. Chamber music, piano music, songs were intended for quite private performances. And that had a big following, and he was quite popular in Vienna in his time for these evenings of playing the smaller formats. So it's not surprising that that was what most of his contemporaries were interested in.
Yes, we tend to privilege the symphony now, whereas in Schubert's Vienna, it was a comparatively minor genre. You know, so much more music making was taking place, as you say,
exactly,
in smaller scale contexts.
Exactly. But then these last 2 symphonies, they're just incredible. The big C major is a masterwork. It's long, it has this big horizon, romantic, yet classical.
Now you've mentioned the length of it there, because that I've got a question about that.
Yes.
And we know that the length of this symphony was an issue in the 19th century, and it's believed that one of the reasons that Vienna's Gesellschaft der Musikfreunde rejected the work was that it was just too long. It was too difficult and it was too long. Yet conversely, Robert Schumann praised this symphony, the Ninth, for what he described as its heavenly length. So for Schumann it was heavenly, for the members of the Gesellschaft it was much too long. And I have to say that I struggle with the length of this symphony. And particularly, I find the second movement very long and the third movement rather long as well. How do you respond to that? I mean, is this symphony about the right length for you? Do you think it's too long? If it is really long, how do you pace yourself and the orchestra across, you've mentioned the word horizon, you know, such a long arc?
First of all, I agree with Schumann. I think
heavenly
it's
length.
Heavenly length. I think it's beautiful. And some musicians, also from the first performances, complained how difficult and tiring. When I played this symphony myself, I've always enjoyed it. I never found it long. It's the same that musicians sometimes complain about Bruckner, especially the strings, having to play a lot of tremolo. I think it's wonderful. And for a modern audience where most people would have heard the symphony several times, I don't include absolutely all of the repeats. So I take out a few, which is pretty standard now in our time. We can do that without ruining the form. And I just think the material is so strong. It carries us through a performance. I mean, it's still short compared to a Wagner opera or the longest Mahler symphonies. I think it's an absolutely fantastic masterwork.
Yeah, so you don't find it exhausting then to conduct?
No, because Schubert always has this lightness. There's lightness in Schubert. Dramatic, but there's something, I mean, he is the composer of the Lied. So there is a singing quality, a lightness, just this gift. In this sense, he's a little bit like Mozart.
Yeah.
Just the writing is so natural, unfolds in such a beautiful way. It's a pleasure to do this piece.
Now, two names you've mentioned already are Mozart and Bruckner. You know, if we have to put a label on this symphony, and you know, maybe labels aren't that important, but you know, are we talking here, it's a symphony for 1826? It's sort of around the same time as Beethoven's Ninth. It's only a couple of years before Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique. Are we talking here in the Ninth about a classical symphony, or is it a romantic symphony?
It's just in between. And with Schubert's C major, I think the form is classical, but the content is romantic, and especially his use of harmony and modulations. That's definitely romantic. So you can ask the same question about Beethoven's Ninth. Is it still classical? Of course, in one sense it is, but also points forward deep into the Romantic era.
Yeah, these are sort of interesting pieces that sort of sit in the borderlands, if you like, you know, between the past and the future. Yeah. Eivind, thank you so much for coming on to chat about the piece, and we look forward to the performance, so toi toi toi. That brings Concert 101 to an end. I hope that you found it illuminating and that you'll join us for our next instalment, but for now, goodbye.